My daughter told me I was too poor to contribute to her dream wedding at the exclusive Moonlight Gardens Estate. But what she didn't know was that I owned the entire property. And when she tried to humiliate me in front of her future in-laws by suggesting I stick to my little craft projects instead of embarrassing myself at fancy events, the look of absolute terror on her face when the venue coordinator called her personally to cancel everything was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building my empire from nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me start from the very beginning, because this story isn't just about one moment of sweet revenge. It's about 32 years of unconditional love, endless sacrifices, and building something extraordinary, only to have my own flesh and blood decide I wasn't sophisticated enough for her perfect day. My name is Victoria Harrington, and I'm 55 years old. To most people in the charming town of Willowbrook, I'm just the quiet woman who runs the small pottery studio on Cedar Lane. You know the type. Always has clay dust under her fingernails, drives a 15-year-old Toyota Camry with a few dents, shops at the local thrift stores, and wears the same comfortable flannel shirts year-round. The kind of person who brings homemade cookies to town meetings and helps elderly neighbors with their groceries. Simple, humble, working class. Unremarkable, forgettable, poor. That's exactly how I designed it. What my daughter Penelope, and frankly most of this picturesque little town, doesn't know is that Victoria Harrington owns more real estate in Willowbrook County than anyone else. The pottery studio? It's just my passion project. My way of staying connected to the artistic roots that have always grounded me and kept me close to the community I've called home for over 3 decades. My real business is Harrington Properties, a luxury real estate development and hospitality company that I built from absolutely nothing after my husband walked out when Penelope was just 4 years old. 28 years ago, when James abandoned us with nothing but a pile of unpaid bills and a broken promise to find himself in California, I made a choice that would define the rest of our lives. I could either crumble under the weight of single motherhood and financial ruin, or I could make damn sure my little girl never wanted for anything ever again. I chose to fight. So while she slept peacefully in her toddler bed, I studied real estate law by lamplight. While she played with her toys during the day, I worked 3 different jobs: cleaning offices before dawn, serving lunch at the local diner, and stocking shelves at the grocery store after she went to bed. While she enjoyed carefree weekends at the playground, I was learning about property investment, market analysis, and business development strategies. The first property I bought was a run-down duplex on the wrong side of Willowbrook. I lived in one half with Penelope and rented out the other to help cover our basic expenses. Every spare dollar went back into improvements. I learned plumbing, basic electrical work, painting, and landscaping. Whatever it took to increase the value and create something better. Then I bought another property, and another. Each building I purchased, I renovated with my own hands. My fingernails were permanently stained with paint and grout. My back ached from countless hours of manual labor. But my bank account grew, and more importantly, my daughter's future became more secure with every passing month. By the time Penelope was in middle school, I owned 8 rental properties throughout Willowbrook County. By her high school graduation, it was 23. Today, at 26 years old, she has absolutely no idea that her poor mother owns 41 properties spanning 3 counties, including luxury vacation rentals, commercial buildings, and the crown jewel of the region, Moonlight Gardens Estate. Moonlight Gardens Estate isn't just any wedding venue. It's a breathtaking 40-acre property featuring a restored 1920s mansion, manicured botanical gardens, a crystal-clear lake with a gazebo, and facilities that have hosted governors, celebrities, and the most influential families in the state. It's the kind of place that books 18 months in advance and costs more for a single weekend than most people make in half a year. I purchased it 4 years ago when the previous owners, the prestigious Ashford family, faced financial difficulties during the economic downturn. They had to sell quietly to avoid public embarrassment about their declining fortune. I paid cash through my holding company and have since invested over $3 million, transforming it into the most sought-after event destination in the entire region. The staff knows me as Mrs. Harrington, the property owner who visits monthly for business meetings and quality inspections. But to them, I'm just another successful businesswoman in tailored suits who drives a luxury sedan during work hours. They have no idea I'm the same person who arranges their lobby flowers twice a week, wearing my clay-stained apron and driving my dented Camry. I never told Penelope about any of this because I wanted her to understand the value of hard work, to appreciate what she had, and to treat people with respect regardless of their apparent social status or financial situation. I thought I was raising a daughter who would be proud of how far we'd come together, grateful for the sacrifices that had given her opportunities I never had. I thought I was teaching her humility, integrity, and the importance of character over appearances. I thought that when the right time came, maybe when she got married, maybe when I decided to retire, I would share our true story, and she would understand why I'd chosen to live so modestly despite our actual wealth. I was wrong about everything. Last month, when Penelope announced her engagement to Nathaniel Pemberton, heir to one of the wealthiest families in the neighboring county, I was genuinely happy for her. She'd found someone who clearly adored her, and despite their obvious privilege, Nathaniel had always been kind and respectful during our few interactions. But then came the wedding planning conversations, and I began to see a side of my daughter that shattered my heart into pieces. A side that made me realize I hadn't raised the woman I thought I had. And that's when I knew it was time for Penelope to learn exactly who her mother really was, and what happens when you bite the hand that's been feeding you your entire life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. To understand how completely my daughter had misjudged me, you need to understand the life I'd deliberately constructed in Willowbrook. Every detail of my public persona was carefully chosen, not out of necessity, but as a conscious decision to teach my daughter values that I thought mattered more than material wealth. My pottery studio on Cedar Lane was a perfect example. The building itself was modest. A converted garage with large windows I'd installed myself, pottery wheels arranged around rough wooden tables, and shelves lined with handmade mugs, bowls, and vases. The sign outside was hand-painted in cheerful blue letters. Victoria's Clay Corner, handmade pottery and classes. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. I'd chosen pottery because it reminded me of my grandmother, who had taught me to work with clay when I was Penelope's age. But it also served another purpose. It kept my hands busy and dirty, reinforcing the image of someone who worked with her hands for a living. The clay dust under my fingernails, the comfortable clothes covered in dried mud, the simple lifestyle, it all painted a picture of a hardworking artisan just getting by. My customers were mostly locals who wanted custom pieces for their homes or tourists looking for authentic handmade souvenirs. I charged reasonable prices, $20 for a mug, $60 for a large vase, amounts that suggested I was making a modest living but certainly not building wealth. What they didn't know was that these prices were deliberately low. I could have charged 5 times as much and still had a waiting list, but that wasn't the point. The Toyota Camry I drove around town was a 2009 model with 180,000 miles on it. The paint was faded, there was a dent in the passenger door from where I'd backed into a post at the grocery store, and the interior showed every one of its 15 years. It was reliable, practical, and perfectly unremarkable. Exactly the kind of car a single-mother pottery teacher would drive. What people didn't see was the BMW X7 that sat in the climate-controlled garage of my private residence 15 miles outside town. That car, along with the sprawling modern house it was parked under, existed in a completely different world from my Willowbrook life. My wardrobe in town consisted of the same rotation of comfortable clothes I'd been wearing for years. Flannel shirts in various shades of blue and green, well-worn jeans with actual wear marks from years of use, comfortable sneakers that had seen better days, and a canvas jacket that was practical for carrying pottery tools. I shopped at the local discount stores for these clothes, often buying items that were clearly meant to last rather than impress.
At the grocery store, I used coupons and shopped the sales, filling my cart with store-brand items and practical choices. I bought the marked-down meat that was nearing its sell-by date and chose generic cereals over name brands. The cashiers knew me as someone who watched every penny, someone who would debate whether to splurge on the more expensive coffee or stick with the store brand. But this careful persona extended beyond just material things. I'd cultivated relationships in town that reinforced the image of Victoria, the struggling artist. I volunteered at the community center, helping with their annual fundraisers and donating pottery pieces for their silent auctions. I served on the town's arts council, advocating for local artists and pushing for more affordable studio spaces for creative people who were just starting out like myself. When the town council discussed property development or zoning changes, I would attend meetings and speak passionately about protecting the character of Willowbrook, about not letting wealthy developers come in and change the heart of our community. The irony was lost on everyone in the room except me. I was often arguing against proposals that would have directly benefited my own business interests. At parent-teacher conferences when Penelope was younger, I was the mother who brought homemade cookies in a used Tupperware container, who asked careful questions about scholarship opportunities for college, and who thanked teachers repeatedly for their dedication, despite the limited resources in our school district. Other parents saw me as someone doing her best in difficult circumstances, someone to be admired for raising such a bright daughter despite obvious financial constraints. The local bank knew me as a customer who maintained modest checking and savings accounts, someone who had been slowly building a small emergency fund over the years. What they didn't know was that these accounts were essentially my grocery money. The real wealth was managed through investment firms 3 counties away, completely disconnected from my Willowbrook identity. Even my social interactions reinforced this image. When friends invited me to dinner at nicer restaurants, I would often suggest more affordable alternatives or offer to cook at home instead. When they planned weekend trips or talked about home improvements, I would listen wistfully and make comments about someday when I can afford it, or maybe when business picks up. At church, the small Methodist congregation where I'd been a member for over 20 years, I was known for my consistent but modest tithing, my willingness to help with fundraisers, and my practical approach to the church's financial challenges. When they needed new carpet for the sanctuary, I was among the voices advocating for the more affordable option rather than the luxurious choice some members preferred. The local coffee shop knew my order by heart, a simple black coffee, no expensive specialty drinks, often accompanied by whatever pastry was marked down from the day before. I would sit at the same corner table with a pottery magazine or a library book, looking every bit the part of a small-town artist living simply and contentedly. This wasn't deception for its own sake. It was a deliberate choice to live according to the values I wanted to instill in Penelope. I wanted her to see that happiness didn't come from material possessions, that success was measured in character rather than bank balances, and that there was dignity in honest work regardless of the income it produced. I thought I was teaching her to judge people by their actions rather than their net worth, to appreciate simple pleasures and to understand that wealth didn't determine worth. I thought that by living modestly despite our actual means, I was showing her what really mattered in life. What I failed to realize was that instead of learning these lessons, Penelope was learning to be ashamed of what she perceived as our limitations. Instead of developing appreciation for simple living, she was developing a complex about not having enough. Instead of understanding that money didn't equal worth, she was concluding that our apparent lack of money made us worth less. And that misunderstanding was about to collide with the reality of who I actually was in the most painful way possible. The truth about who I really was began 28 years ago in the cramped apartment above Murphy's Diner, where Penelope and I lived after James left us with nothing but broken promises and a stack of unpaid bills. I was 27 years old, had never held a job that paid more than minimum wage, and suddenly found myself responsible for a 4-year-old who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. Those first months were the darkest of my life. I would put Penelope to bed in our single bedroom while I slept on the pull-out couch in what generously could be called a living room. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation from the neighboring apartments, and the heating barely worked during Willowbrook's brutal winters. I remember nights when I would layer every blanket we owned on Penelope's bed and then sit awake, too cold and too worried to sleep. But it was during those sleepless nights that I started planning our escape from poverty. While Penelope slept, I would sit at our tiny kitchen table with library books about real estate, investment strategies, and small business development. I taught myself to read financial statements, understand property law, and calculate return on investment. Knowledge became my lifeline. My first job was cleaning offices at Pemberton Financial. Ironically, the same company where my future son-in-law's family built their fortune. I would arrive at 4 a.m, before the executives showed up, and clean their conference rooms where they made million-dollar decisions. I emptied their trash cans filled with documents about property acquisitions and development projects, and I began to understand how real wealth was actually built. The second job was at Willowbrook Elementary, where I worked in the cafeteria during lunch hours. This allowed me to be near Penelope during the day and learn about the community from the inside. I listened to teachers discuss the best neighborhoods, heard parents talk about property values, and began to understand which areas of town were positioned for growth. My third job was stocking shelves at Henderson's Hardware after Penelope went to bed. Old Mr. Henderson took pity on me and let me bring her along on weekends, where she would play quietly in the paint aisle while I learned about construction materials, renovation costs, and contractor relationships. Those conversations with contractors and handymen taught me more about property improvement than any textbook ever could. For 2 years, I worked 18-hour days and saved every penny that didn't go to basic survival. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch and dinner so Penelope could have proper meals. I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation and bought her clothes from thrift stores, always making sure she looked well cared for, even if I looked exhausted. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly widow who lived in our apartment building, mentioned that she needed to sell her deceased husband's duplex because she couldn't afford the maintenance. The property was on Elm Street, in a neighborhood that everyone considered rough, but I had been watching the city planning meetings and knew that area was slated for revitalization. I had saved exactly $8,200, every dollar I could squeeze from my 3 jobs. The duplex needed $15,000 in work, but Mrs. Rodriguez was desperate and agreed to owner financing if I could put down $5,000 and take over the existing mortgage. I spent my last $3,200 on immediate repairs to make 1 unit livable. Penelope and I moved into the smaller unit, and I rented the larger one to a young teacher for $650 a month. After the mortgage payment, taxes, and insurance, I cleared $180 monthly. Not much, but it was passive income, and it was ours. I spent the next year renovating that duplex with my own hands. I learned plumbing by watching YouTube videos and practicing on weekends. I taught myself electrical work from library books and by befriending the contractors who shopped at Henderson's Hardware. I learned to lay tile, install fixtures, and even do basic carpentry. My hands became permanently stained and calloused, but every improvement increased our equity. When the duplex was worth $45,000, I refinanced and pulled out $15,000 to buy my second property, a rundown single-family home that I converted into a rental. Then I bought a third. Each property taught me more about renovation, property management, and market analysis. By the time Penelope was in 3rd grade, I owned 6 rental properties and had generated enough passive income to quit 2 of my 3 jobs. I kept the position at Henderson's Hardware because it connected me to contractors and gave me access to materials at cost, but I finally had time to breathe. The real turning point came when I noticed that Willowbrook was attracting more tourists due to its proximity to the state park and growing reputation as an artist's community. I started buying larger properties and converting them into vacation rentals, charging premium rates to visitors who wanted authentic small-town experiences. Within 5 years, I had built a portfolio worth over $2 million. I established Harrington Properties as a formal business entity, hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations, and began focusing on larger acquisitions and development projects. The pottery studio wasn't just a cover story, It was a genuine passion that kept me grounded in the community I was secretly transforming. I bought the building that housed it, along with 3 others on Cedar Lane, gradually renovating the entire block while maintaining its charming, artistic character. As my wealth grew, so did my influence in ways that no one recognized. When the town council debated zoning changes, I would advocate for responsible development while quietly ensuring that my own properties would benefit from the decisions. When local businesses struggled, I would sometimes become their anonymous landlord, offering reasonable rents that kept the community character intact while providing steady returns. The Moonlight Gardens Estate purchase was the culmination of everything I had learned about real estate investment and development. The Ashford family had inherited the property but lacked the capital and vision to maintain it properly. They needed a quick, private sale to avoid public financial embarrassment. I paid $2.8 million cash through a holding company and immediately began a comprehensive restoration. I hired the finest craftsmen to restore the 1920s mansion's original details, while adding modern amenities that luxury event clients expected. The botanical gardens were redesigned by a landscape architect who had worked on estates in Newport. The lake was dredged and restocked, and a handcrafted gazebo was built using reclaimed materials from historic buildings. The entire renovation took 18 months and cost an additional $3.2 million, but the result was breathtaking. Moonlight Gardens Estate became the most exclusive venue in the region, booked solid for 18 months in advance and commanding premium rates that justified every dollar of investment. The business model was perfect. High-end clients paid premium prices for exclusive access to a truly special venue, while the property appreciated in value due to its unique position in the market. It generated substantial income while serving as the crown jewel of my real estate empire. But beyond the financial success, Moonlight Gardens represented something deeper. It was proof that the scared young mother who had once worried about paying rent had built something extraordinary. It was a legacy I could leave to Penelope, a foundation for her future that would provide security for generations. I had created all of this, every property, every dollar, every opportunity, while maintaining the modest lifestyle that I thought would teach her the right values. I had built an empire while appearing to struggle, accumulated wealth while preaching contentment, and created a legacy while living like I had nothing to leave behind. What I didn't realize was that this carefully constructed contradiction would eventually destroy the very relationship I had worked so hard to protect. The sacrifices I made for Penelope weren't just financial, they consumed every aspect of my life for over 2 decades. While other women my age were dating, traveling, or pursuing personal dreams, I was pouring every ounce of my energy into building a foundation that would give my daughter opportunities I'd never had. When Penelope was 5, she came home from kindergarten crying because some classmates had made fun of her secondhand backpack. Instead of explaining that we could afford a new one, I sat with her that evening and helped her decorate it with fabric markers and iron-on patches, turning it into something unique and beautiful. She was so proud of her designer backpack the next day, but I spent that night researching child psychology books, wondering if I was handling her social challenges correctly. Every decision I made was filtered through one question: what would be best for Penelope's character development? When she wanted the expensive name-brand sneakers that all her friends wore, I would take her to 3 different stores, comparing prices and discussing the difference between wants and needs. We would ultimately buy a similar but less expensive pair, and I would watch her face carefully, trying to determine if I was teaching her valuable lessons about money or just making her feel different from her peers. The school years were particularly challenging because I was constantly balancing my desire to provide for her with my commitment to teaching her values. When the 6th grade class went on a field trip to Washington, D.C., the cost was $300 per student. I had $300,000 in my investment accounts at that point, but I made Penelope earn half the trip cost by helping with extra chores and working at the pottery studio after school. I told her we needed to budget carefully for such expenses, watching as she carefully counted the money she'd earned and felt genuine pride in contributing to her own experience. High school brought new challenges as Penelope became more aware of social hierarchies and financial differences between families. Her friend Rachel lived in the affluent Brookshire neighborhood and had a bedroom that was larger than our entire apartment had been when Penelope was little. When Penelope started spending weekends at Rachel's house, she would come home asking why we couldn't have a pool or a 3-car garage or a kitchen with granite countertops. These conversations broke my heart because I could have given her all of those things. The house I owned outside of town had all the luxury amenities she admired at her friends' homes, but she didn't know it existed. Instead, I would sit with her at our modest kitchen table and talk about how happiness came from relationships and experiences, not from material possessions. I could see the doubt in her eyes, and I began to worry that my lessons weren't taking hold the way I'd hoped. The college years were the most expensive test of my commitment to this lifestyle. Penelope had been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, but the remaining costs were still substantial. I could have written a check for the full amount without affecting my lifestyle, but instead I made it appear that we were stretching our resources to make her education possible. I took on additional pottery commissions, started teaching weekend classes, and even picked up part-time bookkeeping work for local businesses. Penelope watched me work these extra hours and felt guilty about the financial burden her education represented. She offered to transfer to the local community college to save money, and I had to fight back tears as I assured her that her education was worth every sacrifice. What she didn't know was that I had already established a college fund that could have covered her expenses at any university in the country. The extra work I was doing wasn't financially necessary. It was theater designed to reinforce the lesson that education was valuable enough to justify real sacrifice. During her sophomore year, Penelope called me crying because her laptop had died during finals week, and she couldn't afford to replace it. I drove 3 hours to deliver a borrowed laptop from a friend, when in reality I had purchased a top-of-the-line model that morning. She was so grateful and promised to pay me back from her summer job earnings. I accepted her payments of $50 a month for the next year, depositing each check into a savings account I planned to give back to her someday. The summer internships were another source of stress. While her classmates took unpaid internships at prestigious companies, Penelope felt pressure to work paying jobs to help with family expenses. I encouraged her to take the unpaid internship at the marketing firm that would advance her career, secretly subsidizing her living expenses, while making it appear that we were just barely managing the additional costs. After graduation, when Penelope wanted to move to the city for her first job, I helped her calculate budgets for apartment deposits and furniture costs. We spent weekends shopping at thrift stores and discount furniture outlets, finding pieces that would make her small apartment feel like home. I watched her beam with pride as she showed me how she'd arranged her new furniture, knowing that I could have furnished her entire apartment with 1 month's income from my properties. The pattern continued into her adult life. When her car broke down, I helped her research used car loans and co-signed for a reliable but modest sedan. When she wanted to take a vacation with friends but couldn't afford it, I would slip her an extra $200 as a bonus for helping me with pottery studio inventory. When her apartment needed repairs that her landlord wouldn't cover, I would show up with tools and materials, spending my weekend fixing her plumbing or painting her bedroom. Every financial milestone in her life became an opportunity for me to teach lessons about hard work, careful budgeting, and the importance of earning what you received. When she got promoted at work, we celebrated with a modest dinner out. When she saved enough for a security deposit on a better apartment, I helped her move and praised her financial discipline. When she started dating Nathaniel and worried about affording appropriate clothes for dinners with his family, I offered to take her shopping with my employee discount at a boutique where I was actually a silent partner. The emotional cost of maintaining this charade was enormous. I attended parent functions at her school wearing carefully chosen outfits that looked appropriate but not expensive. I drove my old car to her college graduation while sitting next to parents in luxury vehicles, listening to them discuss their vacation homes and investment portfolios. I smiled and nodded when other mothers talked about their daughters' expensive career wardrobes or elaborate weddings, all while knowing I could have provided Penelope with more than any of them. But the hardest part wasn't the financial deception. It was watching Penelope gradually develop a complex about our perceived limitations. I began to notice that she would deflect questions about her family background, that she seemed embarrassed when I showed up at her workplace in my pottery-stained clothes, and that she had stopped inviting me to social events where she knew I might feel out of place. The sacrifices I had made weren't just monetary. I had sacrificed dating opportunities because no relationship seemed worth the risk of complicating the careful balance I had created for Penelope. I had sacrificed friendships because maintaining my modest persona required constant vigilance. I had sacrificed travel, luxury experiences, and personal indulgences that my wealth could have easily provided. Most painfully, I had sacrificed the honest relationship I could have had with my daughter. Every conversation about money was filtered through lies of omission. Every expression of gratitude she showed for my sacrifices was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our actual situation. Every moment of pride I felt in her accomplishments was tinged with the knowledge that she was achieving them while being ashamed of the family foundation that made them possible. I had built an empire to secure her future, but in the process I had created a chasm between us that was about to prove unbridgeable. The ironic twist that would ultimately destroy everything began to take shape 3 months before Penelope's engagement, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It started with an innocent conversation over dinner at her apartment, where she served me takeout Thai food on the expensive dishes I had secretly helped finance through her employee discount at the boutique. "Mom, I need to tell you about someone special," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "His name is Nathaniel Pemberton, and I think you're going to love him." The Pemberton name was familiar to me for reasons Penelope couldn't imagine. Pemberton Financial wasn't just the company where I had once cleaned offices at 4 in the morning. It was now one of my investment firm's most significant clients. Through a complex web of holding companies and investment vehicles, Harrington Properties managed several real estate transactions for the Pemberton Family Trust. I had sat in boardrooms with Nathaniel's father, discussing million-dollar property acquisitions, while he had no idea that the woman presenting investment opportunities was the same person who used to empty his trash cans 25 years earlier. But that night, listening to Penelope gush about her new boyfriend, I was simply a mother excited to see her daughter happy. She told me about his kindness, his intelligence, and his genuine interest in her work at the marketing firm. She was careful to mention that he came from a wealthy family, watching my face for signs of intimidation or concern. "Money doesn't matter if he's a good person," I told her, meaning every word. "I'm just happy you found someone who appreciates you." What I didn't anticipate was how Nathaniel's family background would trigger Penelope's deepest insecurities about our own financial situation. Over the following weeks, as their relationship grew serious, I began to notice subtle changes in how she spoke about our family and our lifestyle. When Nathaniel first came to dinner at my house, I served a simple meal of homemade lasagna and salad, the kind of comfort food I had always prepared for special occasions. He was genuinely warm and appreciative, complimenting my cooking and asking thoughtful questions about my pottery work. But I caught Penelope apologizing for the modest meal and explaining that I preferred simple entertaining to more elaborate dinner parties. During that visit, Nathaniel admired the pottery pieces displayed throughout my living room and asked about my artistic process. As I explained the different glazing techniques and firing methods, I could see Penelope growing increasingly uncomfortable. Later, she would tell him that I was, quote, very passionate about my craft, in a tone that made it sound like pottery was a charming hobby rather than a legitimate artistic pursuit. The real turning point came when Nathaniel invited Penelope to a family dinner at the Pemberton estate. She spent weeks agonizing over what to wear, ultimately purchasing an expensive dress that consumed most of her monthly discretionary income. She asked me for advice about conversation topics, worried that she wouldn't fit in with his family's sophisticated social circle. "Just be yourself," I told her. "If they're good people, they'll appreciate you for who you are." But when she returned from that dinner, something had fundamentally shifted. She was quiet and distant, clearly processing an experience that had shaken her confidence. Over the next few days, the story emerged in pieces. The Pemberton family lived in a mansion that was larger than any building she had ever seen. They had staff who served dinner on china that was older than our entire town. The conversation had revolved around topics: art acquisitions, charitable foundations, international travel, that were completely outside her experience. "I felt so out of place," she confessed to me a week later. They were all talking about their summer homes and their children's private schools, and I had absolutely nothing to contribute. When they asked about my family, I didn't know what to say. "How do you explain that your mother makes pottery and lives in a tiny house without sounding like you come from nothing?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. The life I had carefully constructed to teach her values had instead become a source of shame. The modest lifestyle I thought would keep her grounded had actually made her feel inferior. The financial lessons I believed would serve her well had instead created a complex about her worth in relation to others. But the most devastating realization was yet to come. A month later, when Nathaniel proposed with a ring that cost more than most people's annual salary, Penelope immediately began planning a wedding that would prove she belonged in his world. And the centerpiece of that plan was Moonlight Gardens Estate. "I've been researching wedding venues," she told me excitedly, "and there's this absolutely incredible place called Moonlight Gardens Estate. It's where all the most important families in the region hold their events. Mom, it's like something out of a fairy tale. This beautiful mansion with gardens and a lake, the kind of place you see in magazines." I felt the blood drained from my face as she continued describing my own property, my own restoration work, my own vision brought to life. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from the estate's website, images I had personally approved, marketing materials that showcased every detail I had lovingly restored. "It's incredibly exclusive," she continued, "and expensive, but Nathaniel's parents think they might be able to get us in through their connections. Apparently, the waiting list is usually 2 years, but the Pemberton name carries weight in these circles." The Pemberton name. They thought they would need their influence to book my venue for their son's wedding. The irony was so profound it was almost comedic, except that nothing about this situation was funny. "It sounds beautiful," I managed to say. "But isn't that kind of venue quite expensive?" Penelope's expression shifted, and I could see the exact moment when she remembered that she was talking to her poor mother about a luxury that was completely beyond our supposed means. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone I had never heard before, "you don't need to worry about the cost. Nathaniel's family is handling all the wedding expenses. They insist on paying for everything because they want it to be perfect. And they understand that this level of event is, well, it's not something we could manage on our own." Not something we could manage. My own daughter, planning to celebrate her marriage at a venue I owned, was explaining to me that it was beyond our financial reach. The property I had purchased and restored, the business I had built, the empire I had created, all of it was being dismissed as irrelevant to her most important day. But what came next was even worse. Over the following weeks, as wedding planning intensified, I realized that Penelope wasn't just planning to celebrate at my venue. She was planning to exclude me from the celebration itself. It started with small comments about guest lists and seating arrangements. She mentioned that the Pemberton family had specific expectations about the kind of event this would be. She talked about the importance of maintaining a certain standard and ensuring that everyone would be comfortable with the social atmosphere. When I asked about my role in the wedding planning, she assured me that everything was being handled and that I shouldn't stress about details. When I offered to contribute financially, she dismissed the suggestion with the same patronizing kindness she might show to a child offering to help with adult problems. The full scope of her plans became clear during a conversation about flowers. The estate required couples to use their preferred florist for all arrangements, and Penelope mentioned that the professional flowers would cost more than I made in several months at the pottery studio. "But Mom," she said, as if struck by sudden inspiration, "maybe you could contribute something small, like maybe you could make some simple centerpieces for the cocktail tables? Nothing elaborate, just some of your handmade pottery pieces with basic flowers from your garden. It would be a sweet personal touch, and it would let you feel involved without having to compete with the professional arrangements." Cocktail table centerpieces. At my own venue, using pottery I had made and flowers I had grown, while professional florists created the real arrangements that would define the visual atmosphere of the event. My daughter was planning to get married at the property I owned, using vendors I approved, celebrating with resources I had provided, while offering me the privilege of contributing craft projects that wouldn't interfere with the sophisticated aesthetic her new family expected. And she had no idea that every detail of her perfect day existed because of the woman she was trying so carefully to manage and contain. The irony was perfect, and it was about to become perfectly destructive. The transformation in Penelope wasn't sudden, it was a gradual erosion of the values I thought I had instilled, replaced by an obsession with appearances and social status that grew more pronounced with each passing week. What I had initially dismissed as pre-wedding nerves revealed itself to be something much more troubling. My daughter was systematically rewriting our family history to fit the narrative she needed for her new life. It began with small changes in how she spoke about our past. During a family barbecue at Nathaniel's cousin's house, I overheard her telling other guests about her unconventional upbringing in a way that made it sound charming rather than challenging. She described my pottery work as artistic pursuits and our modest lifestyle as deliberately simple, as if I had chosen minimalism as a philosophical statement rather than as a cover for teaching her values. When someone asked about her father, she smoothly explained that her parents had different life philosophies and that she had been primarily raised by her mother, who believed in hands-on learning and creative expression. The abandonment, the financial struggle, the years of uncertainty, all of it was repackaged into a story that sounded intentional and artistic rather than desperate and heartbreaking. But the most painful changes were in how she began treating me personally. The shift was subtle at first, a slight stiffening when I hugged her in public, a tendency to steer conversations away from topics that might reveal too much about our actual circumstances, a new habit of suggesting we meet at restaurants rather than at my house when Nathaniel might be around. The first time she outright lied about me was during a dinner party at the Pemberton estate 3 months after the engagement. I only learned about it later, when Nathaniel mentioned something that didn't make sense based on what Penelope had supposedly told his family about my background. "Your mother must have really interesting stories from her gallery days," he said during one of our conversations. "Penelope mentioned that you used to work in art sales before focusing on your own pottery." Art sales, gallery days. I had never worked in either field, but apparently, Penelope had decided that cleaned office buildings while studying real estate law didn't fit the sophisticated backstory she was constructing. Instead, I had become a former art dealer who had chosen to pursue her own artistic vision in a small-town setting. When I confronted her about this fabrication, she became defensive and dismissive. "It's not really lying, Mom. It's just contextualizing. You do know about art, and you did work before focusing on pottery. I'm just presenting it in a way that makes sense to people who might not understand the full complexity of your journey." The full complexity of my journey. She was rewriting 28 years of sacrifice and struggle into a story palatable for people who had never faced real hardship. But the lies weren't just about the past, they were increasingly about the present. When Nathaniel's sister commented on my charming old car, Penelope explained that I was environmentally conscious and preferred vintage vehicles. When his mother noticed my practical clothing during a casual encounter at the grocery store, Penelope described my style as authentically bohemian, rather than simply practical and affordable. Each explanation dug the hole deeper, creating a version of me that was exotic and artistic rather than ordinary and hardworking. She was turning my deliberate modesty into a performance piece, my practical choices into aesthetic statements, my genuine values into quirky personality traits that could be explained to wealthy people as charming eccentricities. The wedding planning amplified these tendencies exponentially. Every conversation about the event became an opportunity for Penelope to demonstrate her newfound sophistication, while simultaneously managing the problem of her background. She began speaking about vendors, venues, and guest expectations, with an authority that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so obviously performative. "We need to be very strategic about the seating arrangements," she told me during one planning session. "The Pemberton family has certain expectations about social dynamics, and we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable. Some of their friends move in very specific circles, and conversation topics might not align with what some of our guests are accustomed to discussing." Our guests. She was already creating categories, dividing the wedding attendees into our people and their people, with clear implications about which group would need to be managed to avoid social complications. When I suggested that mixing different types of people might actually make for a more interesting and warm celebration, she looked at me with the patient expression of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "Mom, this isn't a casual family gathering, this is a formal event with significant social implications. When you're marrying into a family like the Pembertons, every detail reflects on both families' reputations. We can't just throw everyone together and hope for the best." The word reputation began appearing in her vocabulary with increasing frequency. She worried about our family's reputation, about making the right impression, about ensuring that nothing we did would reflect poorly on the Pemberton name. The irony of her concerns was staggering. She was obsessing over maintaining a reputation with people who would have been impressed by our actual achievements if she had simply told them the truth. But telling the truth was no longer an option in Penelope's mind, because she had convinced herself that the truth wasn't good enough. The real story of how I had built success from nothing was less appealing to her than the fictional story of the quirky artist who had chosen an unconventional path. This became most apparent during conversations about her wedding dress shopping. When Nathaniel's mother offered to take her to exclusive boutiques in the city, Penelope accepted graciously while privately agonizing about how to handle the cost. She couldn't afford the dresses they would be looking at, but she also couldn't admit that to her future mother-in-law without destroying the carefully constructed image she had created. The solution she developed was to have me co-sign for a credit card that would allow her to purchase an expensive dress while appearing to pay for it herself. She presented this to me as a temporary arrangement. She would pay it off over time from her salary, and it would allow her to maintain her dignity during the shopping experience. "I just need to be able to participate normally in these activities," she explained. "I can't have Mrs. Pemberton thinking that basic wedding expenses are beyond our reach. It would be too embarrassing for everyone involved." Embarrassing for everyone involved. My daughter was more concerned about the potential embarrassment of appearing financially limited than she was about the actual financial strain she was creating for herself. She preferred debt and deception to honesty about our circumstances. But the most revealing moment came during a conversation about bachelor and bachelorette parties. Nathaniel's friends were planning an expensive weekend in Aspen, and Penelope felt pressure to organize something comparable for her own celebration. The cost would be substantial: luxury accommodations, expensive activities, premium dining, far beyond what her actual budget could handle. When I suggested that she could plan something lovely and memorable without breaking the bank, she looked at me with genuine frustration. "Mom, you don't understand the dynamics here. These aren't just parties. They're social events that set the tone for how we're perceived within their circle. If I organize something cheap or amateur, it reflects on my ability to function at their level. It suggests that I don't understand their standards or that I'm not capable of meeting their expectations. Their standards, their expectations, their level." My daughter had completely internalized the belief that the values and lifestyle I had modeled for her were inadequate preparation for the life she wanted to build. Everything I had taught her about character over appearance, substance over style, had been discarded in favor of a desperate need to prove she belonged in a world that measured worth by different metrics entirely. What she didn't realize was that the world she was so desperate to join was already hers by birthright, not because she had married into it, but because she had been born into wealth that I had been carefully hiding from her for her entire life. And that revelation was about to collide with her carefully constructed deception in the most devastating way possible. The discovery of Penelope's true feelings about me came through a technology mistake that shattered any remaining illusions I had about our relationship. It was a Tuesday evening in early October, and I was at the pottery studio working late on a custom order when my phone buzzed with what I thought was a text message from Penelope. Instead, I found myself accidentally added to a group chat titled Pen's Perfect Day Planning Squad. The message that appeared on my screen made my hands freeze on the clay I was shaping. Okay, ladies, we need to finalize the mother situation before the venue walkthrough on Saturday. I'm getting anxiety attacks just thinking about it. I stared at the phone, recognizing the other participants: Penelope's maid of honor, Rebecca, her bridesmaids, Ashley and Caroline, and Nathaniel's sister, Miranda. These were the women helping plan the most important day of my daughter's life, and apparently, I was a situation that needed to be managed. Rebecca responded first. "What exactly are you worried about? I thought the Pembertons were handling most of the expenses." Penelope's reply came quickly. "It's not about money. Well, not entirely. It's about the whole dynamic. She's not equipped for this level of event. You know how she gets nervous around wealthy people, and this wedding is going to be full of the Pemberton family's friends. Corporate executives, judges, people who own multiple homes and send their kids to Ivy League schools." I set down my pottery tools, my heart beginning to race, as I realized I was reading a conversation I was never meant to see. Ashley chimed in, "But won't people expect the mother of the bride to be prominently involved? Like front and center for photos and sitting at the head table?" "That's exactly the problem," Penelope wrote. "I love Mom dearly, but she's going to stick out like a sore thumb." Picture her in her comfortable flannel shirts and sensible shoes, trying to make small talk with people who vacation in Europe and collect art. It would be mortifying for everyone. Mortifying for everyone. The words felt like a physical assault. My own daughter was describing my presence at her wedding as something that would cause embarrassment. Miranda, who I had met only twice and had seemed polite during our brief interactions, added her perspective. "Could you maybe give her a makeover? New clothes, professional hair and makeup? Sometimes that can help people feel more confident in formal situations." "I've thought about that," Penelope replied, "but it's not just about appearance. It's about, how do I put this delicately? Mom doesn't understand social nuances. She might say something inappropriate or ask questions that reveal how out of her depth she is. Like, what if someone mentions their art collection and she starts talking about her pottery pieces as if they're comparable? Or what if she mentions shopping at thrift stores or clipping coupons?" The conversation continued, and each message felt like another knife to my chest. These women, including my own daughter, were discussing me like I was a social liability that needed to be carefully managed to prevent damage to Penelope's reputation. Caroline suggested, "What about limiting her involvement? Like, she could be there for the ceremony but maybe skip the reception? That way she gets to see you get married, but you don't have to worry about managing her during the more social parts of the evening." "I've actually been thinking about that exact thing," Penelope responded. "The ceremony is only 30 minutes, and she'd be sitting with other family members, so there wouldn't be much opportunity for awkward interactions. But the reception is 4 hours of mingling and conversation with people who live in a completely different world from hers." Rebecca asked, "What would you tell people about why she left early?" Family emergency, maybe? Or I could say she doesn't handle large crowds well and prefers quiet gatherings. Which isn't exactly untrue. She does seem more comfortable in small groups. I was reading my daughter's strategic plan to exclude me from celebrating her marriage while making it appear to be for my own comfort and well-being. She was crafting a narrative that would allow her to minimize my presence while maintaining the illusion of being a caring daughter who was protecting her mother from an overwhelming situation. But the conversation took an even darker turn when Ashley brought up a concern I hadn't anticipated. What about when people ask about wedding costs? Everyone knows Moonlight Gardens is incredibly expensive, and if your mom is there, someone might make a comment about how much it must cost, or ask how your family contributed to such an elaborate event. Penelope's response revealed the full extent of her deception. That's been keeping me up at night. If anyone asks Mom directly about wedding expenses or our family's contribution, she might say something that reveals our actual financial situation. She's never been good at deflecting those kinds of questions, and she might accidentally make it obvious that we couldn't afford any of this without the Pembertons' generosity. Miranda added, you could prep her beforehand, give her some standard responses to redirect those conversations. I've considered that, but Mom's not good at that kind of social maneuvering. She's very straightforward and honest, which is usually a good thing, but not when you need to navigate delicate social situations. If someone asks her directly how much she contributed to the wedding, she's likely to just say, we couldn't afford to contribute much, instead of giving a more diplomatic answer. The irony was breathtaking. Penelope was worried that I might accidentally reveal our actual financial situation at an event being held at a venue I owned, paid for with money I had earned, managed by staff I employed. She was concerned that my honesty might embarrass her in front of people whose respect she desperately craved, not knowing that many of those same people were my business associates and clients. Caroline brought up another concern. What about photos? Even if she only stays for the ceremony, there will be family photos, and those might end up in society pages or on social media where the Pemberton family's friends will see them. I've thought about that too, Penelope replied. We could do most of the formal photos before the ceremony, during the getting ready time. That way we get the important family shots, but they're more casual and intimate rather than part of the main event coverage. They were planning to photograph me like a family obligation to be checked off a list rather than as the mother of the bride celebrating her daughter's most important day. The final blow came when Rebecca asked, are you sure this is the right approach? I mean, she is your mother, and she's obviously sacrificed a lot to support you over the years. Penelope's response destroyed the last remnant of my heart. Of course I'm grateful for everything Mom has done. She's worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities, and I love her for that. But gratitude doesn't change the reality that she's not equipped for this social environment. I'm trying to find a way to honor her role in my life while protecting both of us from an uncomfortable situation. Protecting both of us. She had convinced herself that excluding me from my own daughter's wedding reception was an act of kindness rather than betrayal. She had reframed her embarrassment about my perceived social status as concern for my comfort and well-being. But there was more. As I continued reading, the scope of their planning became clear. They had discussed everything from what I should wear, something simple and classic that won't draw attention, to how I should be introduced to important guests, just say she's artistic and loves working with her hands, to contingency plans if I said something that made Penelope uncomfortable. Rebecca, you'll be my signal person. If I touch my earring, find a way to redirect the conversation. They had created a comprehensive strategy for managing the embarrassment of my presence at my own daughter's wedding. Every potential scenario had been analyzed and planned for. Every possible source of humiliation had been identified and addressed. The last message in the thread was from Penelope, sent just an hour before I accidentally received access to the conversation. Thanks for helping me think through all of this, ladies. I know it sounds harsh, but I just want everything to be perfect. This wedding isn't just about me and Nathaniel. It's about the impression we make on his family and their social circle. I can't afford to have anything go wrong. I sat in my pottery studio, surrounded by the work of my hands, reading about how my presence at my daughter's wedding would be the thing that might go wrong. The clay on my potter's wheel had dried and cracked while I read, becoming as brittle and ruined as my relationship with the person I had sacrificed everything to raise. My daughter didn't just think I was too poor for her wedding. She thought I was too embarrassing, too unsophisticated, too socially inadequate to be publicly acknowledged as her mother during the most important celebration of her life. And she had no idea that she was planning this elaborate deception at a venue owned by the woman she was so carefully planning to exclude. The phone call I made to Penelope the next morning was perhaps the most difficult conversation I had ever initiated. After a sleepless night staring at the ceiling and replaying every message from that devastating group chat, I had decided to give my daughter one final opportunity to be honest with me. I wanted to believe that if confronted directly, she might find the courage to tell me the truth about her plans and feelings. I waited until 9 a.m., knowing she would be at her desk at the marketing firm, settled into her workday routine. When she answered, her voice was bright and cheerful, completely unaware that I had spent the night reading about how my presence at her wedding would be a potential disaster. "Hi, Mom, how's your morning going? I was just thinking about you. I saw the most beautiful pottery piece in a magazine that reminded me of your work." The casual warmth in her voice made what I was about to do even more painful. "Penelope, I've been thinking about the wedding, and I realized we haven't really talked about my specific role in everything. I'd love to understand what you're envisioning." There was a slight pause, just long enough to suggest that this wasn't a conversation she was prepared for. "Your role? Well, of course you're my mother. You'll be there for all the important moments." "That's wonderful to hear. Can you walk me through what that looks like? For instance, where will I be sitting during the ceremony?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, traditionally the mother of the bride sits in the front row, but with the Pemberton family being so large, we're still working out the exact seating arrangements. The important thing is that you'll have a great view and be surrounded by people who love you." It was a masterful non-answer, diplomatic enough to avoid commitment while sounding reassuring, but I pressed further. "And what about the reception? I'd love to know more about what you're planning for that part of the celebration." "The reception will be lovely, Mom. Very elegant, very formal. The kind of event where everyone gets to celebrate and enjoy themselves." She was being deliberately vague, and we both knew it. "Penelope, I'm asking specifically about my role during the reception. Will I be at the head table? Will I be giving a speech? Will I be participating in the traditional mother-daughter moments?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was more careful, more controlled. "Mom, can I ask why you're suddenly so focused on these details? You've never been someone who cares about formal protocols or being the center of attention." She was deflecting, trying to make my questions seem out of character, rather than addressing them directly. But I recognized the tactic and refused to be distracted. "I'm asking because I want to understand what my daughter is planning for one of the most important days of her life. I want to know how I can best support you and be the mother you need me to be." "You're always the mother I need you to be," she said quickly, but I could hear the strain in her voice now. "It's just that this wedding it's complicated. There are a lot of moving pieces and different family dynamics to consider." "What kind of family dynamics?" "Well, the Pemberton family has certain expectations about how events like this should be handled. They're very traditional about some things, and they have specific ideas about proper etiquette and social protocols." "And how do those expectations affect my participation in your wedding?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to find a way to explain her plans, without admitting what she really thought about my social adequacy. "Mom, I think maybe we should have this conversation in person. These kinds of details are easier to discuss when we can really talk through everything together." She was stalling, buying time to figure out how to handle a situation she clearly hadn't prepared for. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. I'm asking now, Penelope. As your mother, I think I deserve to know what role you're planning for me in your wedding celebration. Of course you deserve to know, it's just… She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had taken on that patronizing tone I was beginning to hate. It's just that I want to make sure everyone is comfortable, including you. This is going to be a very formal event with a lot of people you don't know, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed or out of place. Out of place at my own daughter's wedding? That's not what I meant. It's just that formal events can be stressful, especially when there are a lot of social expectations and unfamiliar protocols. I'm trying to plan things in a way that lets you enjoy the day without having to worry about anything complicated. The word complicated was doing a lot of work in that sentence. What she really meant was that my presence would complicate her carefully orchestrated performance for the Pemberton family. Penelope, are you planning to exclude me from the wedding reception? The directness of the question seemed to catch her off guard. Exclude you? Mom, that's a terrible thing to say. I would never exclude you from anything. Then you'll be including me in the reception? I'll be at the head table, participating in all the traditional activities, staying for the entire celebration? Well, it's not that simple. The head table is really small. And with both sets of parents and the wedding party, space is very limited. And as for staying for the entire reception, she trailed off, clearly struggling to find the right words. As for staying for the entire reception, what? I just think you might be more comfortable if you didn't feel obligated to stay for the whole thing. Receptions can go very late, and there's a lot of standing and socializing with people you don't know. I thought you might prefer to enjoy the ceremony and maybe the dinner. Then feel free to leave whenever you wanted without feeling like you had to stay until the very end. Every word was carefully chosen to make my early departure sound like a kindness rather than an exclusion. She was offering me the option to leave early, while making it clear that she hoped I would take it. And what would you tell people when they asked where the mother of the bride went? I would tell them that you had other commitments or that you preferred smaller gatherings. People would understand. Not everyone enjoys large, formal parties. She had an answer ready, which meant she had definitely thought about this scenario, probably discussed it extensively with her planning committee. Penelope, do you think I'm capable of handling a formal social event? Of course I think you're capable. It's not about capability. Then what is it about? Another long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her desperation to find a way out of this conversation that wouldn't require her to admit what she really thought. Mom, why are you pushing me on this? Can't we just focus on the fact that this is going to be a beautiful celebration of love and family? Because I want to understand why my own daughter seems to be planning her wedding around minimizing my presence. That's not what I'm doing. Then explain to me what you are doing. I'm trying to plan a wedding that works for everyone involved. I'm trying to balance different needs and expectations and social dynamics. I'm trying to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and that the day goes smoothly without any unnecessary stress or complications. And my presence would create stress and complications? I never said that. You didn't have to say it, Penelope. It's been clear in every conversation we've had about this wedding that you see me as a problem to be managed, rather than as your mother celebrating your happiness. Her voice cracked slightly when she responded, "That's not fair, Mom. That's not how I see you at all." Then how do you see me? The silence that followed was the longest yet. When she finally spoke, her words confirmed everything I had feared. I see you as someone I love deeply who might not be entirely comfortable in the kind of social environment this wedding is going to create. I see you as someone who has always preferred simple, authentic experiences over elaborate formal events. I see you as someone who might feel more relaxed and happy if you didn't have to navigate 4 hours of small talk with strangers who move in very different circles from ours. Our circles. She was still creating categories, still dividing the world into us and them, still convinced that I belonged in a different social sphere from the one her wedding would occupy. "Penelope," I said quietly, "what if I told you that you've completely misunderstood who I am and what I'm capable of?" "What do you mean?" "What if I told you that the assumptions you've made about my social skills, my financial situation, and my ability to handle formal events are all wrong?" "Mom, you're scaring me. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that this conversation has revealed more about how you see me than I ever wanted to know, and it's not a very flattering picture. Please don't take this the wrong way. I'm just trying to make good decisions for everyone involved." "The way I'm taking it, Penelope, is exactly the way you meant it. You're embarrassed by me, and you're planning your wedding around that embarrassment." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" The silence that followed was my answer. My daughter couldn't deny what we both knew to be true because the evidence was overwhelming. Every plan she had made, every concern she had expressed, every solution she had proposed, was based on the fundamental belief that I was a social liability who needed to be carefully managed to prevent damage to her reputation. "I think," I said finally, "that it's time for you to learn something about the woman you've been so worried about embarrassing you." And with that, I hung up, leaving my daughter to wonder what exactly she was about to discover about the mother she thought she knew so well. The venue walkthrough at Moonlight Gardens Estate was scheduled for Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, and I made sure to arrive early. Not as Penelope's mother, but as Victoria Harrington, property owner, conducting what my venue coordinator Patricia knew as a routine monthly inspection. I wanted to observe my daughter's tour of my property, to watch her plan her wedding celebration in the venue I had created, to hear firsthand how she spoke about me when she thought I was safely contained in my pottery studio across town. I positioned myself in the estate's library, a beautifully restored room on the second floor with windows that provided a perfect view of the main entrance and access to the central hallway where Patricia always began her tours. I had brought a clipboard and some property maintenance reports, playing the role of a businesswoman reviewing operational details.
At exactly 10 o'clock, a convoy of luxury vehicles pulled into the circular driveway. Nathaniel's family arrived in a silver Mercedes sedan, while he and Penelope came in his BMW. The final car was a white Range Rover, carrying what I assumed were members of the wedding party. I watched through the library windows as my daughter stepped out of the passenger seat, and I barely recognized her. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that I had never seen before, paired with leather boots that probably cost more than I supposedly made in a month at the pottery studio. Her hair had been professionally styled in an elaborate updo, and she carried herself with a practiced elegance that looked both natural and completely foreign to the girl who used to help me load pottery pieces into my old Toyota. But it was her expression that broke my heart. She looked terrified. Despite all her planning and preparation, despite her careful management of every detail, she was clearly nervous about this moment when her two worlds would collide in the most public way possible. Mrs. Pemberton emerged from the Mercedes wearing the kind of understated luxury that screamed old money. A navy blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, pearls that had likely been in the family for generations, and the confident bearing of someone who had never questioned her place in any social hierarchy. Patricia appeared at the main entrance with her usual professional warmth, clipboard in hand and ready to begin what I knew would be her premium tour package. I had instructed her months ago to provide the full presentation for the Pemberton-Harrington wedding, complete with champagne service and access to all areas of the property. "Good morning, everyone," Patricia's voice carried clearly through the morning air. "Welcome to Moonlight Gardens Estate. I'm Patricia Mills, your venue coordinator, and I'm absolutely delighted to show you through what I believe is the most beautiful wedding venue in the region." The group moved into the main foyer, and I quickly repositioned myself in the hallway where I could hear their conversation while remaining out of sight. Patricia began her standard presentation about the estate's history and restoration, explaining how the 1920s mansion had been transformed into a premier event destination, while maintaining its original architectural integrity. "As you can see," Patricia was saying as they entered the main ballroom, "we've maintained all the original details while adding modern amenities. The crystal chandeliers are original baccarat pieces that were completely restored by craftsmen in Europe. The hardwood floors are original heart pine that was refinished using traditional techniques. I listened to Patricia describe work that I had personally overseen, investments that I had personally approved, restoration details that I had personally insisted upon. Every element she praised represented hours of my time, decisions I had made, and money I had spent creating something extraordinary. It's even more spectacular than the photographs, Penelope breathed, and I could hear the genuine awe in her voice. Can you imagine our reception in this space? It's certainly impressive, Mrs. Pemberton replied, though her tone was more evaluative than enthusiastic. The restoration work appears to be museum quality. Do we know who handled the renovations? I'd want to ensure they used appropriate materials for a structure of this historical significance. The current owner spared no expense on authenticity, Patricia replied smoothly. Every detail was researched and executed to the highest standards. The chandeliers alone required 18 months of restoration work, and the woodwork was done by craftsmen who specialize in period-appropriate techniques. The current owner. Patricia was describing my commitment to excellence to people who had no idea they were hearing about the work of Penelope's supposedly inadequate mother. As the group moved toward the gardens, I heard Nathaniel's sister Miranda make a comment that sent chills down my spine. Penelope, you're so fortunate that Nathaniel's parents can provide access to a venue like this. I can't imagine what it would have been like trying to plan a wedding of this caliber on a more limited budget. I'm incredibly grateful, Penelope replied, and I could hear the careful modulation in her voice. The Pemberton family has been so generous, and they understand that this level of venue is, well, it's not something my family could have managed independently. Not something my family could have managed. My daughter was standing in my ballroom, admiring my chandeliers, planning her reception at my venue, while explaining to her future in-laws that it was beyond our financial capabilities. But the conversation took an even more painful turn when they moved outside to tour the gardens. I repositioned myself near a window where I could observe them walking through the landscaped grounds that I had designed and paid for. The botanical gardens are absolutely breathtaking, Mrs. Pemberton was saying as they approached the rose garden. Someone clearly invested significant resources in creating this landscape. It's like something from a fairy tale, Penelope agreed. So much more elaborate than anything I grew up around. Nathaniel, who had been relatively quiet during the tour, finally spoke up. Didn't you mention that your mother enjoys gardening? She might appreciate seeing these gardens sometime. The pause that followed was pregnant with meaning. I watched Penelope's body language change, her shoulders tensing as she navigated the delicate social territory of discussing her embarrassing family background. Mom's gardening is more practical, she said carefully. She grows vegetables and simple flowers, the kind of things you'd find in a basic home garden. This is more like horticultural art, a completely different level of sophistication and design. Horticultural art. She was describing my gardens I had personally planned with a landscape architect, gardens where I had selected every plant and supervised every installation as something completely beyond my understanding or capability. Miranda, apparently trying to be helpful, suggested, maybe she could contribute some of her homegrown flowers for the simpler arrangements? It would be a sweet, personal touch. That's actually a wonderful idea, Mrs. Pemberton agreed. We could use her flowers for the guest bathroom arrangements, or maybe some of the outdoor cocktail tables. Nothing that would compete with the professional florals, but a nice way to include her contribution. Guest bathroom arrangements. They were standing in gardens that I had created, discussing how I might be allowed to contribute simple flowers for the least important decorative elements of the event. But the most devastating moment came when they reached the gazebo overlooking the lake. This was the spot where I had envisioned Penelope taking her wedding photos someday, back when I had purchased the property with dreams of sharing it with her. The gazebo itself had been custom-built using reclaimed materials from historic buildings, and it offered the most romantic view on the entire estate. This will be perfect for photographs, the wedding photographer said, joining the conversation for the first time. The lighting here is exceptional, especially during golden hour. It's absolutely magical, Penelope agreed, and for a moment she sounded like the daughter I remembered, genuinely moved by beauty rather than calculating its social implications. But then Mrs. Pemberton made a comment that shattered any remaining warmth I felt toward this family. I do hope we can manage the guest list carefully for this location. Some people might feel overwhelmed by this level of elegance. We want everyone to be comfortable, but we also want to maintain the sophisticated atmosphere that makes this venue so special. Some people. The careful euphemism hung in the air, and everyone understood exactly who she was referring to. Penelope's response confirmed my worst fears. Absolutely. I've been thinking about that exact issue. We want to make sure that everyone who's here genuinely appreciates and fits with the setting. This venue deserves guests who can fully appreciate its significance. Guests who could fully appreciate its significance. My daughter was agreeing that I didn't belong at my own venue because I wouldn't properly appreciate the property I had created. The tour concluded with champagne on the terrace, where Patricia presented the contract details. I listened from my hidden position as Charles Pemberton reviewed the costs. $52,000 for the complete package, including ceremony space, reception venue, catering for 175 guests, and premium bar service. The investment is substantial, he acknowledged, but for an event of this significance, quality is essential. Exactly, Mrs. Pemberton agreed. This isn't just a wedding. It's the foundation for how Penelope and Nathaniel will be perceived within our social circle. Every detail needs to reflect the standards our family maintains. Their social circle, their standards. I was listening to my future son-in-law's family discuss my daughter's wedding as a strategic investment in social positioning rather than a celebration of love and family. As the group prepared to leave, I heard Penelope make one final comment that crystallized everything wrong with this situation. Thank you all so much for making this possible. I know this venue is far beyond what my family could ever provide, and I'm so grateful that Nathaniel's family values quality enough to invest in something this extraordinary.
Far beyond what my family could ever provide. She was standing on property that I owned, surrounded by gardens I had planted, planning an event in a ballroom I had restored, while thanking other people for providing access to something that was already hers by inheritance. My daughter didn't just think I was too poor and too socially inadequate for her wedding. She was actively grateful to other people for giving her access to things that I had already created for her. The irony was complete, and it was about to become perfectly, devastatingly clear. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October and Willowbrook could provide, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had spent Sunday night in my home office, not the modest house where Penelope thought I lived, but my actual residence. A sprawling contemporary home 15 miles outside town that she had never seen. Surrounded by financial documents, property deeds, and business records, I had made the decision that would change everything. At 8 a.m. sharp, I called Patricia from my private office overlooking the lake that bordered my real property. Patricia, this is Victoria Harrington. I need to schedule an emergency meeting about the Pemberton Harrington wedding contract. Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Is there a problem with the booking? You could say that. I'll be there at 10 o'clock, and I want you to prepare the contract cancellation paperwork. There was a pause. Contract cancellation? Mrs. Harrington, that's quite unusual for a booking of this magnitude. May I ask what's prompted this decision? You may ask, but the answer is simply that I've decided this particular event is not appropriate for my venue. I see. Should I prepare any specific reason for the cancellation documentation? Venue unavailable due to unforeseen circumstances. Standard cancellation clause applies. Full refund of deposits. Very well. I'll have everything ready for your signature. What I didn't tell Patricia was that I wanted to give Penelope exactly 24 more hours of happiness. 24 hours to bask in the afterglow of her perfect venue tour, to call her friends and gush about the beautiful estate, to maybe even drive by Moonlight Gardens again just to take more pictures. I wanted her to have one more day of believing that everything was falling into place before her world collapsed. I also needed time to prepare for what would come next. The revelation I was about to deliver wouldn't just destroy her wedding plans. It would fundamentally alter our relationship forever. There would be no going back from this moment, No pretending that I hadn't learned exactly how she saw me. No returning to the comfortable fiction we had maintained for so many years. Monday evening, I received the text message I had been expecting. Mom! The venue tour was absolutely incredible. Moonlight Gardens is even more beautiful than I imagined. I can't wait for you to see it during the ceremony. You're going to love the gardens especially. The Pembertons are being so generous with everything. Sometimes I can't believe how lucky I am. I stared at that message for a long time before responding. My daughter was telling me how excited she was for me to see my own property, expressing gratitude to other people for providing access to my own venue, marveling at her good fortune in gaining entry to something that was already hers. I'm glad you're happy, sweetheart, I replied. Enjoy every moment of the planning process. Tuesday morning brought the call I had been anticipating since I made my decision. At 9:47 a.m., my phone rang with Penelope's number. Mom? Her voice was different, shaky, confused, panicked. Good morning, dear. How are you? Something terrible has happened. The venue, Moonlight Gardens, they just called and canceled our wedding. I continued arranging the flowers I was working on, taking my time to adjust each stem. That's awful, sweetheart. What happened? They said the venue is suddenly unavailable due to unforeseen circumstances. They wouldn't give any details, just that they're very sorry, but the estate is no longer available for our date, and they'll be refunding our deposit. How strange. Did they offer any explanation? Nothing. Patricia Mills, the coordinator, just said there were circumstances beyond their control and that the property owner had made the decision. It doesn't make any sense. We just toured the place on Saturday and everything was perfect. Maybe there's a structural problem, I suggested calmly. Old buildings sometimes have issues that don't show up until the last minute. But we were just there 3 days ago. Everything was immaculate, and now they're saying it's completely unavailable? Mom, this is a disaster. We sent save the dates 6 weeks ago. Mrs. Pemberton has already told half of her social circle about the venue. We have vendors booked who can't be moved to other dates. I could hear the hysteria building in her voice, and part of me, the mother who had loved her unconditionally for 26 years, wanted to comfort her. But a larger part of me, the woman who had read those group chat messages and listened to her dismiss my worth on Saturday, felt only cold satisfaction. I'm sure there are other venues, Penelope. Other venues? Mom, this isn't about just finding another place. Moonlight Gardens isn't replaceable. It's the most prestigious venue in the region. Do you have any idea what this means for our wedding? For how the Pemberton family is going to perceive this situation? How are they going to perceive it? They're going to think we're incompetent. They're going to think we can't manage basic event planning. Mrs. Pemberton specifically chose that venue because it reflected the kind of standards their family maintains. Now we're going to have to settle for some inferior location, and everyone's going to know we got kicked out of the premier venue. Settle for some inferior location. Every word she spoke confirmed that this was never about love or family or celebration. It was about status and appearances, and impressing people whose approval she valued more than her relationship with me. Penelope, don't you think you're being a bit dramatic? At the end of the day, you're marrying someone you love. Isn't that what really matters? That's easy for you to say. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. This wedding isn't just about me and Nathaniel. It's about how we're perceived by his family and their entire social circle. If we have to downgrade to the country club or some hotel ballroom, it's going to look like we couldn't afford the real thing. Couldn't afford the real thing or couldn't access it? What's the difference? The result is the same. We'll be starting our marriage with a compromise, with everyone knowing that we settled for less than what we promised. I set down my pruning shears and gave her my full attention. Penelope, what if I told you that I might know exactly what happened to your venue booking? What do you mean? How could you possibly know anything about Moonlight Gardens' business decisions? What if I told you that the circumstances that made your venue unavailable aren't as mysterious as you think? Mom, you're not making any sense. Do you know something about why they canceled? I smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. I know everything about why they canceled, sweetheart. I know exactly who made the decision and exactly why it was made. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that sometimes the people you underestimate turn out to be the people with the most power to affect your life. Mom, you're scaring me. If you know something about what happened, you need to tell me right now. What I need to tell you, Penelope, is much bigger than just what happened to your venue booking. What I need to tell you is who your mother really is. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What do you mean? I mean that for 26 years, you've been making assumptions about my life, my capabilities, and my financial situation. And all of those assumptions have been wrong. I don't understand. I think you do understand on some level. I think you're starting to realize that the woman you've been so worried about embarrassing might not be who you think she is. Mom, please, just tell me what's going on. What's going on, Penelope, is that your venue wasn't canceled by mysterious circumstances. It was canceled by me. Another long silence. Then, that's impossible. Is it? Have you ever actually asked me about my finances? Have you ever seen my tax returns or my bank statements? Have you ever wondered how I managed to pay for your college education without loans? Or help you with apartment deposits? Or co-sign for cars without any apparent strain on my budget? You said we were saving carefully. You said you were working extra hours. I was working extra hours, just not the kind of work you thought. I don't believe you. You don't believe me because you've never bothered to find out who I actually am. You've been so busy being ashamed of who you think I am that you never discovered the truth. What truth? The truth is that Victoria Harrington doesn't just run a pottery studio, Penelope. Victoria Harrington owns Harrington Properties, a real estate development company worth approximately $14 million. The truth is that your supposedly poor mother owns 41 properties in 3 counties, including luxury vacation rentals, commercial buildings, and one very special estate that hosts the most exclusive events in the region. No. Yes, I own Moonlight Gardens Estate, Penelope. I bought it 4 years ago and spent over $3 million restoring it to become the venue where you were planning to celebrate your marriage while excluding me from the reception. The phone was so quiet I wondered if she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken. That can't be true. It's completely true. Every chandelier you admired, every garden you photographed, every architectural detail you praised, all of it was created by the woman you think is too socially inadequate to attend your wedding reception. But the house, your car, your clothes, were choices I made to teach you values that I thought mattered more than material wealth. Choices that apparently backfired completely. Oh my God. Yes, oh my God indeed. Your mother, the woman you've been planning to hide in the back row and dismiss before the important parts of your wedding, owns the venue where you were going to demonstrate your new social status. The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a scream. You canceled my wedding venue because you read some text messages? I canceled your booking because I realized that I've been enabling you to become someone I don't recognize. Someone who would rather invent a fictional version of her mother than admit she comes from working-class roots that built something extraordinary. Please tell me this is some kind of joke. The only joke here, Penelope, is that you've spent weeks worrying about how to manage the embarrassment of your poor mother, when your poor mother is actually the only reason your dream wedding was possible in the first place. And with that truth hanging in the air between us, I hung up the phone, leaving my daughter to face the reality of exactly how wrong she had been about everything. The aftermath of my revelation unfolded with the devastating precision of a controlled demolition. Within hours of my phone call with Penelope, the carefully constructed world she had built around her engagement began to collapse. Piece by piece, relationship by relationship, assumption by assumption. The first casualty was her relationship with Nathaniel. He arrived at my pottery studio late Tuesday afternoon, looking haggard and confused, clearly having driven straight from whatever emergency meeting the Pemberton family had called to address the venue crisis. "Mrs. Harrington," he said as he entered, his usual polite composure replaced by barely controlled panic. "I need to understand what's happening. Penelope is... She's not making much sense right now. She keeps saying things about property ownership and $14 million. And frankly, I'm wondering if she's having some kind of breakdown." I continued working on the vase I was throwing, keeping my hands steady on the clay while my heart raced. "What specifically did she tell you?" "She said you own Moonlight Gardens Estate. She said you're wealthy. She said you canceled our wedding venue because you were angry about some text messages." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "None of it makes any sense. I mean, no offense, but you run a pottery studio and drive a 15-year-old car. And what would you say if I told you that everything Penelope said is true?" He stared at me with the same expression I'd seen on faces in boardrooms when I revealed information that completely shifted the power dynamics of a negotiation. "I'd say that's impossible." I walked to my desk and pulled out the same folder I had prepared for Penelope's eventual enlightenment. Property deeds, business licenses, bank statements, and photographs of restoration work, all the documentation of a life she had never bothered to investigate. "These are the property records showing my ownership of every commercial building on Cedar Lane, including this one. This is my business license for Harrington Properties. These are photographs of Moonlight Gardens Estate during renovation, work I personally supervised and financed. And this," I said, pulling out the final document, "is the deed to the estate where you were planning to marry my daughter." Nathaniel's face went through the same progression of emotions I had witnessed during countless business negotiations. Disbelief, followed by careful examination of evidence, followed by the slow dawning of understanding that everything he thought he knew was wrong. "You're saying you actually own..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "I own the venue where you were planning to celebrate your marriage to a woman who has spent weeks explaining to everyone how I'm too poor and too socially inadequate to attend the reception." He sank into one of the chairs I kept for customers, holding the property documents with trembling hands. "But why would Penelope think you were struggling financially if you're actually..." "Because I chose to live modestly to teach her values. Because I wanted her to understand that character matters more than bank balances. Because I thought I was raising a daughter who would judge people by their actions rather than their assets. And instead you raised someone who was ashamed of what she thought was your financial situation." "Exactly." Nathaniel was quiet for a long time, studying the documents and clearly trying to reconcile this new information with everything he thought he knew about our family dynamics. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with a sadness that surprised me. "Mrs. Harrington, I need you to know that I had no idea about any of this. The plans to exclude you from the reception, the conversations about managing your presence, none of that came from me or my family directly. But you went along with it. Yes, I trusted Penelope's judgment about what would make you most comfortable. She said you preferred smaller gatherings and got nervous at formal events. She made it sound like she was protecting you from an overwhelming situation. And you never thought to ask me directly what I preferred?" His face flushed with embarrassment. "No, I assumed that Penelope knew you better than I did. I thought she was being considerate. She was being considerate of everyone except me." We sat in silence while he processed this information. Finally, he looked up with an expression of genuine confusion and pain. "I don't understand how this happened. How did we get to a place where your own daughter was planning to exclude you from celebrating her wedding? How did I become complicit in something so fundamentally wrong?" "Because Penelope learned to be ashamed of what she thought was our background, and your family's lifestyle reinforced those feelings of inadequacy. She thought she needed to choose between being authentic about her family and being accepted by yours. But he struggled for words. "That's horrible. My family would never ask anyone to choose between love and acceptance. Wouldn't they? Because from what I observed during your venue tour, your mother seemed quite concerned about maintaining, quote, appropriate standards and ensuring that guests could, quote, appreciate the significance of the setting. Nathaniel's face crumpled with recognition. Oh, God, you were there? You heard that conversation? I heard every word. I watched my daughter agree that some people, meaning me, wouldn't fit with the sophisticated atmosphere. I listened to your family discuss my supposed inadequacy while standing in the property I created. Mrs. Harrington, I am so sorry. I had no idea the comments were directed at you specifically. I thought they were just general observations about event planning. General observations about keeping unworthy people away from your celebration. He put his head in his hands. This is all so wrong. Everything about this situation is wrong. Yes, it is. The question is what you're going to do about it. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The confusion and panic were still there, but they were joined by something else, a determination I hadn't seen before. I need to talk to my parents. I need to make them understand what happened here and how their attitudes contributed to this disaster. And what about Penelope? I don't know. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know how to trust someone who could plan to exclude her own mother from her wedding. I don't know how to marry someone who could lie to me for months about something so fundamental. I don't know who I've been engaged to this whole time. The pain in his voice was real, and despite everything, I felt sorry for him. He was discovering that the woman he thought he was marrying had been performing a role rather than being authentic, and that realization was devastating. She's not a bad person, Nathaniel. She's a confused person who lost her way trying to become someone she thought you and your family would approve of. But that's just it. I fell in love with who I thought she was, the real her. I never asked her to change or pretend to be different. If anything, I was attracted to her authenticity, her groundedness, the fact that she seemed to have genuine values. She does have genuine values. She just forgot them when she became convinced they weren't good enough for your world. My world? He looked genuinely puzzled. What world is that? The world of country clubs and private schools and summer homes. The world where people are judged by their portfolios rather than their character. Mrs. Harrington, my family has money, yes, but we've never asked anyone to prove their worth through their bank account. My parents liked Penelope because she seemed authentic and kind, not because of her financial situation. Then why did she feel so much pressure to hide her background? I think, he paused, clearly struggling with a realization. I think she put that pressure on herself. I think she created expectations that didn't actually exist, and then tried to meet them by becoming someone else entirely. It was a perceptive observation, and it forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps the Pemberton family's attitudes weren't entirely to blame for Penelope's transformation. Perhaps she had internalized messages about class and worth that went beyond anything they had explicitly communicated. Regardless of where the pressure came from, I said, the result is that she was planning to exclude me from the most important day of her life because she was ashamed of who she thought I was. And now? Now she has to decide who she wants to be when she's not performing for an audience. Nathaniel stood up slowly, gathering the documents I had shown him. Mrs. Harrington, I want you to know that if Penelope and I do move forward, and I honestly don't know if we will, there will never again be any question about your place in our lives. You would be honored and included in everything, exactly as you should have been from the beginning. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. It's basic human decency. And the fact that we lost sight of that is... He shook his head. I need to do some serious thinking about what kind of family I want to build and what values I want to prioritize. As he walked toward the door, he turned back with one final question. Do you think she can change? Do you think she can remember who she used to be before all of this happened? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I hope so. Because the alternative is that I've lost my daughter to people whose approval was never worth having in the first place. After he left, I sat alone in my pottery studio, surrounded by the simple, honest work that had become my cover story, and wondered if the lesson I was teaching Penelope would destroy our relationship forever, or finally give us a chance to build something real. The silence between Penelope and me stretched for nearly 3 weeks after the revelation. During that time, I watched from my pottery studio as the consequences of her choices rippled through every aspect of her life like stones thrown into still water. The wedding was officially canceled when Nathaniel called off the engagement, not out of anger but out of a profound loss of trust that couldn't be repaired with apologies or explanations. The financial penalties were immediate and brutal. Vendors who had been booked on short notice couldn't fill the canceled dates and demanded payment anyway. The florist, photographer, musicians, and caterer, all of whom operated on tight margins and had turned away other clients for Penelope's date, collectively demanded $31,000 in cancellation fees. The Pemberton family, citing the quote, family situation as the cause of the wedding's collapse, refused to pay penalties for what they considered a breach of good faith. Penelope was forced to liquidate her savings, sell her expensive furniture, and move from her luxury apartment to a modest one-bedroom place she could actually afford on her marketing salary. The designer clothes, the BMW, the carefully curated lifestyle that had taken years to assemble, all of it was stripped away in a matter of weeks, leaving her to confront the reality of who she actually was when she wasn't performing wealth she didn't possess. But the financial consequences, devastating as they were, paled in comparison to the social reckoning. Word traveled quickly through Willowbrook's interconnected social circles about what had really happened. The story wasn't the sanitized version the Pemberton family might have preferred, a simple incompatibility or change of heart. The real story was messier and more damaging. A daughter so ashamed of her family that she had planned to exclude her own mother from her wedding, only to discover that the mother she'd dismissed was actually the wealthiest woman in the county. Some people were sympathetic to Penelope, viewing her as a young woman who had made mistakes under pressure. Others were less forgiving, seeing her behavior as a fundamental betrayal of family loyalty and basic decency. But perhaps most difficult for her to accept was the pity. The way people looked at her with the mixture of sympathy and superiority reserved for those who have brought their misfortune entirely upon themselves. The turning point came on a cold November morning when I found Penelope sitting on the steps of my pottery studio at 6 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee from the gas station down the street and wearing a coat I recognized from her high school wardrobe. She looked exhausted, humbled, and more like the daughter I remembered than she had in years. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours," she said when I unlocked the studio door. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "I always want to see you, Penelope." That was never the question. We went inside, and she sat in the same chair where Nathaniel had learned the truth about our family 3 weeks earlier. But where he had been confused and seeking understanding, she was clearly devastated and searching for something much more fundamental, a way back to who she used to be. "I've been in therapy," she said finally, 3 sessions a week since everything fell apart. I needed to understand how I became someone who could treat you the way I did." "And what have you learned?" "That I was so afraid of not being enough that I convinced myself you weren't enough either. That I was so desperate to earn love from people who didn't really know me that I rejected love from the person who knew me better than anyone." Her voice broke slightly. "That I spent years being ashamed of the most extraordinary person I know because I was too shallow to see past the surface." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Go on." "I learned that you spent 26 years building me a fortune while teaching me values, and I responded by deciding the values weren't sophisticated enough for the life I wanted to live." She took a shaky breath. "I learned that when someone loves you enough to sacrifice everything for your future, the appropriate response is gratitude, not embarrassment." "Penelope." "I'm not finished." Her voice was stronger now, more determined. "I learned that the mother I was ashamed of is actually the most successful businesswoman in 3 counties. I learned that while I was worrying about which fork to use at fancy dinners, you were sitting in boardrooms making million-dollar decisions. I learned that while I was apologizing for your simple lifestyle, you were choosing to live modestly because you valued character over consumption. She pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed her carrying. I also learned some things you never told me, such as the fact that you've been anonymously funding the arts programs at Willowbrook Elementary for 15 years. Such as the fact that when Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't afford her cancer treatments 2 years ago, a mysterious benefactor paid her medical bills in full. Such as the fact that the community center's new pottery studio, the one they said was donated by a foundation, was actually paid for by Harrington Properties. I had forgotten she might discover those things if she started investigating my business activities. Those were private matters. Private acts of generosity that you never took credit for. While I was busy trying to distance myself from your embarrassing charity work, you were quietly changing people's lives. She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of thank you letters. Mrs. Rodriguez wrote you a letter every month for 2 years. Did you know that? Letters you never responded to because she didn't know who you were. I had to look away. The letters from Mrs. Rodriguez were filed in my home office, read and treasured but never acknowledged because anonymity had been important to me. Mom, you've spent your entire adult life building something extraordinary while pretending to be ordinary. You've helped dozens of families while acting like you could barely help yourself. You've created more value and done more good than most people dream of, and you did it all while raising a daughter too stupid to appreciate what she had. You're not stupid, Penelope, you were confused. I was worse than confused. I was ungrateful. I was selfish. I was so concerned with impressing people whose respect wasn't worth having that I lost sight of the person whose respect should have mattered most. She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. This is everything I have left after paying the cancellation fees, $1,843. I want to start paying you back for everything you've given me over the years. Penelope, I don't want your money. I know you don't want it, but I need to give it to you. Not because I think money can fix what I broke, but because I need to start rebuilding my relationship with you on honest terms. No more pretending, no more assumptions, no more taking your generosity for granted. I looked at the check, such a small amount compared to what I had spent on her over the years, but representing everything she had left after the collapse of her carefully constructed life. What do you want from me, Penelope? I want a chance to earn back your trust. I want to learn who you really are, not who I assumed you were. I want to understand your business and maybe someday contribute to it instead of just benefiting from it. She paused, gathering courage for her next words. And I want to become someone you can be proud of again. I was always proud of you. Even when I didn't like your choices, I was proud of your intelligence, your ambition, your capabilities. What I wasn't proud of was how you let other people's opinions matter more than your family's feelings. I know, and I want to change that. I want to be someone who lifts up the people who've lifted her up, instead of pushing them away. We talked for 4 hours that morning, sitting in my pottery studio as the sun came up over Willowbrook. We talked about the lies she'd told herself about our life, the shame she'd carried about our background, and the fear that had driven her to reject the very foundation that made her success possible. But we also talked about the future, about the woman she wanted to become, and the relationship she wanted to build with me. It wasn't a magical conversation that fixed everything instantly. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself with words alone. But it was a beginning, the first honest conversation we'd had in years, and the foundation for whatever came next. 6 months later, Penelope started working part-time at my pottery studio on weekends, not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to understand the work I was passionate about. She was patient with difficult customers, creative with challenging projects, and genuinely interested in learning the craft that had grounded me through decades of building wealth. A year after the canceled wedding, I offered to teach her about property management and real estate development. Not as an inheritance waiting for my death, but as a partnership we could build together. She accepted, but on the condition that she start as an apprentice, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. Today, 3 years later, Penelope runs the day-to-day operations of Harrington Properties while I focus on new acquisitions and development projects. She's not wealthy yet, but she's successful in ways that matter more than bank balances. She's built a reputation for integrity, innovation, and treating people with respect regardless of their financial situation. We have dinner together every Sunday now, usually at my real house, the one she'd never seen during all those years when I was hiding my success. We talk about business, books, travel plans, and dreams for the future. And sometimes, when the conversation lulls and we're sitting together in comfortable silence, I look at my daughter and see the woman I always hoped she'd become. The most expensive lesson I ever taught cost us both dearly: a canceled wedding, a broken engagement, and months of estrangement. But the most valuable lesson she learned was that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or social connections. It's measured in the strength of the relationships we build with people who love us unconditionally, and in the integrity we maintain when no one is watching. And sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is let their child face the consequences of their choices, trusting that they'll find their way back to the values that matter most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.